So, First Nations Australia has such a wealth of amazing Dreamtime stories and folklore that are prime to be made into genre films by hopefully First Nation filmmakers, right? When I heard that a horror film was coming out based on a child stealing entity that was prolific during the time of white colonization of Australia, I thought that is a fucking phenomenal idea, right? For those who do not know, and I know I've got like most of my audience is outside of Australia, there was a long stretch of time in Australia where the white Australian government decided to take First Nations children who were under 15 off their parents and put them into like white schools, orphanages, and missions. Children who were taken, who suffered this fate, were often known as the stolen generations, right? In these places, they were often used for slave labor, they were physically abused, emotionally abused, often sexually abused, and this initiative was done with the sole purpose of breaking their connection to land, country, and mob. This people who did the initiative, like there are quotes from people who had a hand in doing this initiative, stating that they were trying to breed and educate the black out of these kids. That was the purpose of this initiative, right? Now you're probably thinking, what a fucking horrific thing. You're correct. Jake, how long ago did this happen? Like it must have been, how many hundreds of years ago was that? This was up into and into the 1970s. Like that is how recent this stuff happened. I know people who are members of the Stolen Generations. For reference, right, when Elton John released Crocodile Rock, this was still happening. When John Denver released Take Me Home Country Roads, this was still happening. That is how recent this stuff is. Now, it is no wonder why there is so much trauma in our First Nations community, because it was such a horrible fucking thing for them to endure. Like, it is, if you read accounts of this stuff, it is unfathomable the horrors that they put kids through. It is fucking insanity. And the Moogai by John Bell is all about weaving Aboriginal folklore and the historical events of the Stolen Generation together in a horror movie, right? Now, this is a first time outing, like feature outing for John Bell, and there are flashes of brilliance in this story. This story has like these gems in it, these parts that are just gems. The couple the movie focuses on, Sarah and Fergus, are fantastic. They love each other very much. They're both very successful at their jobs and as parents, and of critical importance to me, they're fucking funny. Like, they are a funny couple. I really liked them. The mother character Ruth, played by Tessa Rose. She's a phenomenal character. She's complex. She's loving. She's capable. She has a lot of knowledge. And she's clearly suffering the effects of PTSD from being mistreated by the government and medical staff for her entire life. The problem is with this movie, though, that the stuff surrounding these gems is really clunky, and I'm worried that that's going to stop this from being a really scary and tense look at an often swept away piece of Australian history for most people, right? Like, I love any movie that brings light to a historical event that I don't know about, and I feel like this could be a good cultural touchstone for lots of people, but I think people are going to bounce off this because while there's some really good stuff in here, it's surrounded by quite Lifetime-like dialogue, and it's a it's just a fucking shame. It's a shame because the themes in this movie are so goddamn important. They're so important. Um, yeah. So the Moogai follows Sarah, played by Shari Sebbins, and Fergus, played by Meyne Wyatt. By the way, Meyne Wyatt, he's an actor, he's a playwright. He also won the fucking Archibald Prize for painting. He is a true phenom of the arts. I fucking love it. Whenever he pops up anywhere, I'm like, fuck yeah. So it was good to see him in this, and he's fantastic in this. He's fantastic. They have just welcomed a new member of their family, a baby named Jacob. Great name. Probably going to be really handsome. Probably going to grow up to be really smart. Just saying. Um, Now, Sarah grew up not knowing her biological mother, Ruth, as she was taken from the hospital and put into a white home. Due to this, she doesn't have a strong connection to mob or their folklore or their customs. She is culturally white in the movie, right? Due to this, due to the birth of Jacob, she has recently reconnected with Ruth, her biological mother, and as such, Ruth has started sharing her history and folklore with the couple, and especially their daughter Mabel, who she's constantly warning to be on the lookout for the Moogai. The Moogai is a child-stealing entity of Dreamtime origin, and after the birth of Jacob, Sarah starts seeing a child who warns her that something is coming for her kids. She starts having these really awful nightmares, and we basically get a front seat to watch as Sarah struggles to keep control and try to convince people that she is not a crazy woman, basically, that these things are actually happening. Now, I always like to start with the positives. The positive: this movie has a fuck ton of great moments in it. There's some really great moments of humour, and they almost all stem from the relationship between Sarah and Fergus and Fergus's brother. There are multiple laugh out loud moments in the theatre. Like, everyone was laughing. It's quite funny, the script. And that's really hard to do in a horror movie, right? Like, the horror that tries to do comedy often fails. They're a really lovely couple. They're obviously very confident. They're very in love. And that's just nice to see in a horror film because, like, I do get sick of seeing inner family conflict in horror. Like, can't we just watch a couple that love each other? These guys do. I love watching Fergus's relationship with his daughter. It's so sweet. And I love a good horror dad. I'm a sucker for a good horror dad. The snippets of folklore that we do get are really interesting. And I know it took parts from Aboriginal folklore. It's not there's not strictly it's not strictly like the Moogai is one thing, like Bigfoot or any of that, but they took snippets, and it's really interesting. The folklore is really interesting, and it has a strong basis in the Dreamtime, and it's really interesting. And whenever Ruth was doing, like, she's dropping some knowledge about the entity and how it reacts and what might keep it away and how to look out for it and all that, I was all in. I love that bit so much. And the strongest bit of this movie probably is the social horror aspects of this film. For a lot of the movie, Sarah is trying to prove that she's not a crazy black woman. And the fact that she's an Aboriginal Australian means that she's already starting at, like, suspicion level 10. Even though she's a high-powered corporate lawyer, people are constantly treating her like she's one step away from being a criminal. And that's a sentiment that, unfortunately, I'm sure a lot of First Nations people in Australia have had to come up against when they're trying to seek help. There are lots of scenes with medical staff or authorities, and, she's trying to get help, and she's just getting pretty much nothing, contempt in some cases. And they're like, we're here to help. And she's like, well, why the fuck would I want your help? Because you're treating me like this. Like, completely understandable, right? This is really good. There's also a great scene towards the end of the movie where the cops rock up. Like, the couple really needs help, and the cops rock up. And, a few people around me in the cinema were like, oh, thank God. And I was like, oh, no. And it's one of the most powerful scenes in this movie. and it's really fucking good. Like, during this conversation with the police, you are just hoping that this character gets out of the conversation unscathed, and it's that tension in the social moments where the movie thrives. Like, it's so fucking good. Also, side note, there's a great part where Fergus just fucking Sonny Bills someone, and I was all about that shit too. Um, the parts where I struggled in this movie is that some of the character decisions did not make sense to me, specifically to do with Sarah and Ruth. There is a part where Ruth basically says, "Hey, this is why I'm worried. This is why I'm trying to help you and do all this protective stuff for you. And this is what you are probably seeing." And it's stuff that it's stuff that Sarah is seeing, and Sarah just basically casts her out, and that didn't make any sense to me because yes, they have a tumultuous relationship, but Ruth clearly had evidence, like tangible evidence, and she was like, "Hey, are you having dreams like this and this and this?" And it was at a point where Sarah's trying to get people to believe her, and Ruth was like, "I know exactly what you're doing. I know how to beat it." All this sort of shit, and Sarah was like, "Get the fuck out." And I just don't think a character that is in that much danger would, especially one as smart as Sarah. Like, I do get that she's very logical and she's so disconnected to the folklore and stuff, but like, I'm a man of science, and at that point, if I was grasping at straws like Sarah was, I would definitely take the help. Also, they didn't explore the relationship between Ruth and Sarah enough for me. Like, these are two great characters, and they have an interesting history or lack of history, and we don't really get any build on it. We just have to infer it. Like, there's a throwaway line here or there, and that's it. And I really would have liked to build on that because they're fucking great characters. They're such good characters. The weakest part of this movie, however, is unfortunately the last part involving a showdown, and that's just because some of the CGI effects they were used way too frequently, right? Like, they used CGI a lot, and they show the monster a lot and really well lit up, and that almost never works in horror. Like, the best horrors don't really show the monster that well, or the monster's like in the dark or the shadows or an event or whatever. This fully puts the monster in light and like focuses on it, and the practical bits of the monster were great, but the CGI parts were quite janky, and it took it from being like quite a creepy creature design. It's really good in the first bit of this movie where they're not showing it a lot, to sort of goofy, which sucks. Which just, I'm bummed. It just did not stick the landing. I really, really, really hope we get more First Nations created horror films, because while this wasn't amazing, there was some really great stuff in here, and it was just surrounded by shaky rapping, and lots of it could just be explained by the fact that it's John Bell's first like feature-length film. This is a great first outing. It's just not as strong as some of the other. It's hard because we've got so much good debut horror this year, and I hope this doesn't get buried, because I'll definitely be seeing what he does next, and I really hope that the themes and viewpoints keep getting explored, because it's how we get amazing films. And I feel like this movie is going to be eye-opening to a lot of people, and it just misses the mark. It just misses the mark, and it's a shame. It's a shame. But keep supporting First Nations horror, because there's been some fucking bangers out there. I recommend watching this if you love indie horror. If you love folk horror, this is really great. Like, the story around the creatures and everything, and when it's happening and how it weaves into the historical events, fucking mwah. That is the strongest part of this movie for sure. If you want to educate yourself a bit on the plight of First Nations Australians, please do. This is not a bad gateway to it, but the shit they went through and are still going through is fucking horrific, and it is recent. It is happening now. It is awful. Australia only officially said sorry like a couple of years ago. That's fucking nuts. I do not recommend watching this if social or racial horror is a trigger for you. I get it. You know, you have to sort of be careful, protect yourself. It's tense. There are some really tense social and racial horror scenes in this movie. If you cannot do janky CGI at all, this will not help that. There is unfortunately some janky CGI that just gets overused a lot at the end. If you like this movie, or are interested in this movie, I highly recommend the 2017 movie Cargo. It stars Martin Freeman, yes, Bilbo, as a guy named Andy who, with his family, escaped to rural Australia, and after a zombie apocalypse hits. Like the best zombie movies, it's a zombie movie about the people, not really the zombies. It's simultaneously heartwarming and fucking heartbreaking, and it's one of my favorite zombie films ever. It's an underrated gem. I fucking love it. I think it's on Netflix. There is an amazing character called Toomey, who I just fell in love with. She's a teenager, and she acts as their guide, even though she's a teenager, she's so wise, she's so funny, and she's so capable, and she's sort of like, dude, I'm trying so hard to keep you alive. Please help me. It's fucking great. She's so great. And it's just a brilliant and harrowing trek through apocalyptic Australia, and it's really good. The horror's really good. It's just a tense, heartbreaking, and heartwarming film at the same time. My next recommend is the latest installment in the Predator franchise, Prey. This movie is fucking phenomenal. Like, phenomenal. I recommended it to my mum. She watched it recently and was like, holy shit, that was so good. It's my second favorite Predator movie ever, and that's a big thing to say because I adore Predator. The original Predator is one of my favorite films of all time. This is just behind it. It's filled with First Nations badassery. It's set on the northern Great Plains in the 1700s, and it follows a Comanche woman named Naru, who is basically slated to be her tribe's healer, and she doesn't want to be. She wants to hunt. Her brother's a hunter. I think her dad was a hunter and chieftain. So when the universe's greatest hunter, the Predator, lands and starts basically fucking up wildlife and her other tribe members, she decides to go toe-to-toe with it. And it's just fucking beautiful to watch. It is a beautiful film to watch. This is one of the greatest action horrors of all time. It was Amber Midthunder and Dakota Beaver's first big roles, and fuck me, they were good. They have a rescue dog in this that they got from a shelter and trained up and adopted out after the movie. It's so good. This is just a good film. It's got some jaw-dropping action sequences, and you can watch the whole thing in Comanche language dub with English subtitles. That shit's cool as fuck. That's so cool. It's so immersive when you watch it in Comanche. It's great. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you tomorrow for the last day of the Spooktober Watchfest. Peace.